Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our second and last debate, the upcoming D&I Changemakers 2021 conference at the beginning of December. With less than 2 weeks to go, to say that our team is extremely busy coordinating speakers from around the world would be a massive understatement. 1 month ago, we talked about the costs of ignoring D&I. Today, we'll go to the other end of the spectrum and discuss what happens when mismanagement, misunderstandings, and misconceptions sometimes lead to a situation where an organization says, enough is enough. Please welcome our guests today. Zuzanna Romancowa, a Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Leader at IKEA Poland. Good morning, Zuzanna. Can you hear me well?
Good morning.
I certainly hope so. Good morning. We have Monika Jankowska-Rangelow, representing Europe, Middle East and Africa, Head of Inclusion, Diversity and Equity at State Street Bank Polska. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Last but not least, Anna Zaroda-Dąbrowska, CEO, Diversity Hub. Good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
First things first, let me just say that I'm truly honored to be participating in one of those still very few panels and discussions where a male voice would be tragically underrepresented. It's not a very common phenomenon. Only yesterday we attended a large conference where, well, debates were dominated by male voices, which is a common trend, isn't it? All right, let's jump right in. We've used I would say, a strong name for this discussion, a D&I Overkill. I suggest we start with symptoms. What are we talking about? When can you talk about a D&I Overkill? What kind of symptoms can you detect and when? Who would like to address this question first? Any volunteers? Much welcome.
Well,
no pressure.
Well, I would start with a very general thought that overkill is when people say no, and I would start with that because I'm very curious of other voices. I have a lot of thoughts, but more on maybe a general level, because I think that we can discuss about overkill on different dimensions. So today, probably we will be discussing about organizational level, about why people say no, about the actions, how they are implemented. Maybe there are too much of them. Maybe they are too, let's say, aggressive in that meaning that people don't understand them. But also, I don't want to start with that. I would like to finalize, also to share my personal thoughts from our regional market here in Poland. We have a very specific situation in politics and society, and we see how it reflects diversity and inclusion in companies.
Do. I couldn't agree more. Anna, anyone else would like to share the symptoms perspective? Because Anna said, when people say enough, and the question that comes to my mind is, what people? Is there a particular sequence? Is there a statistical probability that some people will address this challenge sooner than others? So can you comment on the symptoms a little more, please?
Absolutely, Łukasz. So I was thinking deeply, actually, when we can observe overdose. And you know what? I've come to the conclusion that actually you cannot overdose. But what you can is actually to observe resistance and objection from various stakeholders in the organization. You are asking what people. So this will be all people. This might be all people. This might be employees.
How democratic of you, Monika.
This might be support functions. This might be also clients sometimes. When you have smart objectives around inclusion and diversity and equity, it means that sometimes the operational aspect of the company is really challenged. What also matters is the surrounding of setting the scene, as Anna said, for companies. The surrounding where they operate, the location, the legislation, the political situation. All these things might be challenged by proper standards of inclusion, diversity, and equity. And employees sometimes feel a little bit perplexed because on the one hand, they follow the company's values, they sign the contract, they are employees, and they somehow automatically represent the values of the organization. But what if they really personally do not really agree with the same values? Maybe not necessarily their values are aligned. On the other hand, what I think smart organizations do around inclusion, diversity, equity is to make sure that this is not about the right only way of thinking, but actually they propose openness for different views. And this is all about inclusion, right? That we really accept, respect, and understand that people can have different opinions, and that is okay. They just need to work together and collaborate.
Well, we certainly, because Monica, you started with people almost automatically accepting company values, which doesn't automatically happen as often as we would think sometimes. Susanna, your perspective on symptoms.
First of all, I would like to start by saying that I'm so happy to be here today and discussing this topic because it's so
And we're so happy
unusual.
to have you today.
Unusual that we actually address the issue that many companies face, that they struggle to recognize, and that we finally put our expertise and I think experience into something very much needed. So I'm extremely excited for the topic itself. What I want to emphasize from the very beginning is that this overdose that we'll be discussing today is not about diversity and inclusion per se, it's about poor management. So I think this is the narrative, like this narration we need to focus on, that this is the management issue. It's not about diversity and inclusion. Coming back to your question, Lukasz, about symptoms, I think the most vivid symptom would be disengagement, disconnect. And I agree with Monica that it may come from every coworker in the organization. The matter from the very beginning is to understand what this disengagement is like, who exactly is experiencing it, and when this happens, in what situations. So when we feel, because I think this is more about the feeling, when we feel and observe the actions that might signal us about this disengagement in the organization, we should be like a scientist, a researcher, to understand who, why, and when. And also what is important to emphasize, I think, that, as Anna said, it might be this no, and this would be the symptom. But sometimes there are other forms of no and disengagement. Sometimes you just see that things, they don't happen, right? You don't face the resistance like this direct no, but you see that things don't happen. Or you hear people joking around the initiatives, right? So this might be this passive-aggressive form. So this is such an interesting, such a complex phenomena that I think we need to approach from the different angles.
Fair enough. I suppose I started somewhat provocatively. We all know and agree that just about every discipline loves inventing its own acronyms. I'm sure you will agree on that one. Like in marketing, you have three M's, 5 M's, and S's, etc., etc. So I suppose when I said that D&I overkill starts when you have a lot of mismanagement, misunderstanding, and misconception. Is it fair to say that? Are these the main reasons why you eventually end up with a D&I crisis? Too much of it, wrong way of handling what's essentially about fundamental quality in an organization. Anyone?
Łukasz, I would say
that's
that
why I'm
diversity
giving
of
you some time to
Yeah.
Monica, while I'm giving you a little bit more time to think about this tricky question, let me just say that if any of our wonderful audience members would like to share any thoughts and questions to our panelists, please feel free to do so in the chat window. We have Monica waiting for your questions and passing them over to me via a separate chat window. Okay, Monica?
Diversity overkill can be detrimental to any organization that tries to get too much out of a good thing, in my opinion, However, with the right balance of diversity and inclusion, your organization can benefit from implementing a comprehensive diversity and inclusion strategy, right? Diversity
Monica,
creates
but
tension.
This is where I start pushing you a little, because it's always nice to talk about the right balance, doing it the right way. But I guess the objective of our today's discussion is to give it a more measurable dimension, which basically the questions to follow will lead me in that direction. Can we try and make it a little bit more specific?
Absolutely. So I was just going to say that, if you don't track exactly, to understand where the balance is, if you don't track and measure, you will not see any improvement or progress. If you want to implement the D&I strategy, you need to ensure that there are measurements in place, and not only on the declarative level, not only through gathering the employees' opinion through employee surveys, but also having really concrete, metrics around, for example, representation of gender on different levels in the organization, of every dimension of diversity, like people with disabilities, their presence on managerial positions, not only among random staff. Tracking and reporting will give you the balance you want because you set the goals. Like in business, D&I should not be different than a business approach, in my opinion, because this also requires some changes, improvements, efficiencies in order to go where we want to go. On the other hand, as Susanna mentioned, it's very important that management understands why they are supposed to take a challenge and drive the organization into the right direction. They need to have the proper skills, they need to be supported, they need to be provided with adequate trainings in order to walk the talk, because if they don't, who will? It's not up to D&I manager only, and we know that. It's about business being engaged, involved, and supporting and driving the strategy. If this is done with the right narrative, people will understand why the organization is doing or trying to achieve what they aim at.
I couldn't agree more, Monica. Anna, yes, you would like to comment, but I have a question to you as well.
I would
Anna.
like to comment because I would go one step before what Monica said. And in my opinion, we also need to remember that without, proper recognition of our organization on the level of people's needs and also business needs, there will be a fiasco of diversity and inclusion initiatives. And as we said, as Susanna said at the beginning, that it's a very complex thing. But we need to start from recognizing our organization and getting to know what we are really going to, and getting to know what is the maturity of our organization and our people. Because it's not only building inclusive culture for the benefit of people just to make them feel at home. It is doing that. It's a kind of way of gaining business results and of gaining business success. So we will be talking probably further on about competences of the D&I managers. But
That's
they
exactly what I
need
wanted to talk
think
about.
about two business, two spheres, about the people and their safety, security, and creating a good working environment for everybody, but also realizing business goals. And that understanding from the very beginning is really crucial, because I see, in my experience as a representative of advisory company, that many companies start, not from the beginning. They start from the end, or from kind of additional actions, which are maybe not so necessary from the beginning, and make unnecessary mess in people's minds.
I suppose if we ever have another debate on the subject, I will start by forbidding the use of the right, proper, good, because this is a very delicate substance we are talking about. We are talking about people's values, convictions, predispositions, sometimes preferences. So one should better be really, really careful when talking about it. Anna, Susanna and Monica essentially
Łukasz,
represent.
you
Yes.
you also ensure me that I'm right, because I'm thinking, and I'm talking about recognizing the needs and recognizing what is our environment we are really acting in. So this is
Completely
really the
agree
first
on
step.
that one. Completely agree on that one. What I was going to say is that both Susanna and Monica essentially work for two different companies, while in your case, Anna, you have an umbrella overview of those organizations, which brings me to this question about overkill, which is nothing other than fatigue, when someone is essentially tired, fed up. Can you think of the symptoms that you most often hear from companies that something is wrong, early signs? Because obviously not everyone is a psychological detective within an organization. So what are those symptoms? What are the very first things? How does this crisis grow and evolve? The first
Well,
things you
I
hear.
started with that remark that for me it's when people say no, but as Susanna continued, they may say no in many different ways. So it may be withdrawal, it may be misengagement, it may be the lack of results we observe, and those symptoms can be observed on many different levels of the organizations. We can talk about
So
the
essentially
boards.
so on a non-verbal level, it's essentially sending signals that I'm not into it, all the way through non-compliance. I'm not doing anything about it.
Well, people don't attend. They don't appear on events, for example. They don't they don't take part in D&I activities, and we have many examples that they verbally say no. That okay, it's not a place for LGBTQ plus, for example. This is the very usual situation. Company come to us and ask for advice, how to react and what to do with that.
Is it possibly because they feel that what they value most is underrepresented, as opposed to the overall volume of internal PR that D&I issues are getting? I mean, do they sense there is some kind of imbalance, that there is too much of this particular area of discussion?
Well, it looks differently. It depends. I know you, Łukasz, and I know that you hate that word, but for me, the anti is very contextual. So in many,
Which is a good thing, Anna.
different
It is a good
companies,
thing,
we
isn't it?
see different problems. For example, I experienced a lot of complaints that the majority was against diversity and inclusion, because people complained a lot why we need to adjust. I make a quotation now. Why we need to adjust all the time for those who are in minority. So it may seem as a very general question, but it's very often. This is what leads me to another conclusion, that we really need to I started with trying to explain that we need to start from recognition of the needs and awareness, and also the maturity of the organization and our people. But also we need to find a direct link for them, just to understand why we do it in the workplace. Because people can have different views concerning workplaces. For some of them, there will be, okay, it's my second home. I need to feel safe here. I need a kind of security, mental health security. I want to be who I am. I want to belong. And this way, I also want to be committed, and I raise my engagement in the company. But for many people, the workplace is not a place, to undertake difficult choices. And I started with that. Maybe this is the time to maybe say more about that. We operate mainly in Polish grounds, but and what we see now, that people are really fed up with being challenged to take one side or another, and the situation, political situation or social context divides us, right? And we feel that we are divided. We feel that we are responsible for taking one side of or the other side, and clearly must defend ourselves in that. So, however, at the same time, because of cultural conditions, right, strong influence on of traditional or conservative thoughts, and so on and so forth. And so that makes us very uncomfortable in that condition. And for many people, I see it in my practice, that many people try to really avoid that in the workplace. So they see workplace as a kind of asylum, as a kind of oasis. They really don't want to talk about that in the workplace, because they don't feel secure with that. They don't feel comfortable. They're really fed off being challenged all the time, and having being challenged and making a compromise. This is their perspective. So they see the workplace as a kind of place that they want to have the specific peace of mind, I would say.
Which is not a bad thing, isn't it, essentially? I'm sure Susanna will love the question that I'm going to ask her next. We already have one question from the chat window, so let me just quote this question so that you have a little time to think about it. The question from Tomasz goes like this. Do you think at least D&I activities should be mandatory, even for those who are not in line with D&I, or should it always be optional, or something in the middle? So that's the question for you to think about. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Susanna a question. Susanna, is it one of those problems in our discussion and in the bigger picture around it that D&I managers are not seen as professionals, but essentially random personalities from within an organization who are allocated a certain nondescript area or job description, and essentially there is just too much random activity, accidental allocation, instead of looking at it as if it were a proper job description like you get for a marketing director or manager or HR manager? How do you think?
I think it depends what country this person works in, because obviously there are the markets more or less mature. If we are talking about our region or Poland, obviously D&I manager role is quite fresh and new. So I witnessed that some organizations don't know how to formulate it, right? But this is whose role is to formulate it. I think this is the role of D&I manager, because if the person is looking for this job or taking this position, he or she should understand the scope of this work, and sometimes even to help the organization to define it properly. So not, to go with the flow, but to be creative and proactive in this way. And I think that, at least in our market, this is the responsibility of the person that is occupying this position. And I say so also from my perspective, from my experience, because I joined IKEA in 2019 when the role was just created from the scratch. And obviously, through these 3 years, we've been co-creating my role together and also facing different challenges, because the more you do, the higher are the expectations, right? So if I would compare the job description I got in 2019 and the actual work I'm doing now, that would be quite different things. And this is okay, this is normal. But the thing here is that the D&I manager should take this proactive position and sometimes tell the organization what has to be into the role description or the scope itself. I would also like to get back to the discussion that was before the question, because also basing on my experience, this is like the 3rd year, the last year of the initial strategy I created. And this is the time I reflect a lot about my work. And thinking about today's topic, I've been thinking, like, what are the precise things that helped us to prevent this overdose, and what things I would change now if we were at the risk of the overdose. So I thought that those reflections, like very precise things, might be very beneficial to our discussion. And I just wanted to add a few things here, that I think the number one, if you're talking about overdose, is the right definition, because people and organizations lack the right definition of diversity and inclusion. And sometimes this definition is around underrepresented groups, but the thing here is that it concerns and it relates to every one of us. And this is very important to emphasize in your definition. The second thing is that there is no goal communicated in the organization. And I think this was a success factor to IKEA, because from the very beginning, we defined diversity and inclusion in the wider context of every coworker. Then we put the goal. Why do we do so? One thing, because we want to live our values. The second thing, that we want to be inclusive employer, where you feel respected and heard. We want to be an inclusive company in a sense to our customers. We want to understand the customers, to reflect them, to get the insight, and we need diversity for that. That was the goal that was communicated. And we want also to support the positive change in the society, because we are such a big company that has this connection with society. So the goal. The third thing I think is important to emphasize is the measurement problem. And this is where overdose is, I think, the most frequent phenomena, because many companies...
Okay, please continue.
Yeah, many companies on the market, they measure D&I in this input-output, right? So input, how many trainings there are, how many meetings there are, how many events there are. Output, how many people participated in those events. And this is the source of overdose. Instead, we need to measure the progress, what actually changed in the lived experience of our coworkers. So we should move from quantity to quality. And this is, I think, is extremely important. I'm not taking too much time because I have a few more things to mention, if that's fine.
Please do. That's absolutely fine.
I'm just fascinated by the topic, so I just made the notes what I would change in my work on the daily basis, and I thought that might be beneficial for our audience as well. 3 more things I would emphasize is that overdose happens when we over-focus on awareness instead of focusing on skills. Because when people disengage, when they say no, as Anna mentioned, when they feel that, okay, I don't quite understand the issue and I don't have skills to do anything about the issue, right? So when you put the emphasis on the awareness all the time with all those events, you don't provide people with the exact right skills to manage the diversity. So this is the thing to remember about. Also, this...
May I ask you an extra question? Susanna, in that context? Because I think that also applies to Monica in the sense that you watch this position evolve, and when you compare your original description to where you are at today, these are two different worlds, aren't they? So my question is, as you watched your own organization, IKEA, from inside and understood where its individuality matters, where it's unique, what these employee expectations are, and on the other hand, you saw all those standardization efforts coming from abroad and coming from the bigger picture, from the bigger D&I discussion. Was it easy to put the two together? Because on the one hand, you've got all those KPIs, inadequate as they sometimes are, the number of meetings, the number of documents processed and sent. These are good for, more scientific projects, not ones where values are involved and convictions are involved. So tell us a little bit more, please, about this aspect of how important your company's individuality is when someone is telling you that you should have, say, the same number of men as women in a given area, etc., etc. So how important are those idiosyncrasies, individual qualities of a company, when faced with more generic attempts to find what we call balance? I know,
What's
not
the
an easy
question?
question.
Who
Yeah,
were you targeting?
I was still
Who is the
asking
other
Susanna.
question?
But Susanna, if you could start answering this question, but I'm surely interested to hear your perspective, Monica, as well.
I would say that there are two golden rules of D&I management. The first one is to reflect the local population, the society, and the second one is to reflect the customer base. So obviously we have the global direction as IKEA, but our strategy is a local one, which is fully representing the society and the representation of underrepresented or marginalized groups, as well as our customer base. So this is the must, and this is a very easy question, I would say.
Oh my God, how do you fully represent a society, especially like the one we're dealing with in Poland now?
By understanding it first, and then
Fair enough. Monica?
In my case, I would say that my primary role description does not so much differ from what I'm doing at the moment. I would say that within time, we are maturing as an organization. The needs are changing a little bit because the new, environment just was there on our way in terms of COVID-19. It had a massive impact, as all we know, right? The organization's operations, people well-being. And we were talking about, what, there was the question from the audience, what should be mandatory or expected?
I've got two more,
it's
by the way.
super. So we'll try to answer them in a second. Starting with the first one, I would say that events related to promoting ID should not be obligatory. On the other hand, education should be. So we are not talking about only pushing people to be more aware, to be more sensitive, etc. But smart organizations equip the managers, so those that are implementing these values into the daily life of teams and their relations. They are equipped with very practical skills and are given the opportunities to practice. One of our performance priorities for managers this year is to have candid conversations within teams. We started with race and ethnicity in our organization. We did an action plan, which is a global one. On the other hand,
How
we
candid?
translated
How candid? Like saying, I hate you too.
No, I'm saying that, managers need to practice these conversations to understand what the real issues are, coming from the local background, coming from the local needs of employees and their perceptions. Because not every program that is applicable, for example, in Boston or London, will be equally adequate for Eastern, for example, Europe, like Poland, like other countries around us. because the reality and the society is struggling a little bit differently than other locations. So this
what you're
social...
Yeah, please
Go
finish.
on, Łukasz. No, I was just going to say, sorry, go on with your
That's the
question.
online world with all the delays. We need to wait a little. Please finish.
I was just going to say that the local reality is always equally important as the global standard, but they need to communicate together. And this communication goes through IDE managers that, starting with your initial question, do not only act as, those giving lectures and just explaining everything. They are mediating. Very often they play a role of a mediator between or among different parties involved in this communication. And it's extremely important that D&I managers will be those with right competences, skills, and experience to be able to face the business, to be able to understand the reality, what the people are struggling with on a daily basis, because it's not just a wishful thinking that the world is perfect. No, people are under pressure. People are all the time, inspired to look for efficiencies, which mean very often that they are not available for any extra additional activities, for example, participation in IDE events. So it's up to managers to understand and find the right way for the employees, on the one hand, to enable them to participate, on the other hand, enable them to have this opportunity to understand how important it is also for the organization.
What you're saying is telling me between the lines that this function of a D&I manager is a bit of a filter also, in the sense that a lot of inputs and signals and encouragements and stimuli come from the outside world. And as a D&I manager in the organization, you're someone who needs to filter it through the individual needs and the unique characteristics of your company, which is a tricky job, isn't it?
It is.
It's
Absolutely.
very, yeah,
Go on.
very tricky,
So
because
is it a
it
bottleneck?
works on, it must, that person must really bridge those two worlds, in my opinion. So that's tricky, or that's the difficulty. I would also go back to Monica and comment what she said, because I have something to compliment that what Monica said about that implementation global policies to local grounds. We really see that this is a major thing. And many times when we talk about the entire overkill, this is also the source of not being well understood and so on. And I prepared a lot of examples for today, so maybe now I can take one. We had last year many American companies brought to Poland the idea to talk about racial issues because of Black Lives Matter, and it was really popular topic. And I agree with that totally. But we saw that it was that people here in our region, they didn't feel that topic was relevant for them. And this is the comment to what Monica said, because today, for example, we see that they are looking for more relevant topic for the topics they really can link with. And we observe from some time many inquiries from companies to, for example, provide sessions translating or explaining what's going on the Polish and Belarusian border. So one thing to sum up and add maybe to our previous part of discussion is that finding that personal link to the personal need, to find that personal touch, and this way it's easier to discuss about diversity and inclusion, and it's easier to communicate why we really need it, because people feel the need. But coming back to D&I manager role, for me, it's strategic role more than human resources role. But in fact, the person operates on that two levels. What makes a lot of complications and needs really strong person with a very, very well built competence and skills. And in my opinion, and this is my conclusion, that person must be a real partner for the business and must be treated like a real partner. So only this way.
And by a partner for a business, you
managers
mean
will
senior management, right?
influence the organization and make a change. Yeah.
Anna, by being a partner for the business, you probably mean senior management as well and direct communication.
Yeah. Of course, because that people must impact those people and must have the power, be powerful enough to translate and set aims and targets for diversity and inclusion on the local grounds. Because as we have discussed so far, that translating global policies on local grounds is really crucial and very, very difficult.
Ladies, I would very much like to proceed to our questions. We have 4 questions so far. Tomasz, Pablo, Monica, and Szymon. Let me start with Monica and address this question to Monica. And the question goes like this. What if an employee wants to engage in D&I activity and hears business first, or I don't see your capacity for that? What are your thoughts around that?
Unfortunately, I would say that on many occasions, this is a sad reality functioning in many organizations. As D&I manager, definitely, if I heard such a feedback, I would try to understand why the pushback is so, strong. Because we all understand that if people do not participate in ID events, and for example, especially if they are very interested personally, if they have their personal story interest, for example, they belong to LGBT plus community, or they belong to Working Parents Club, for example, and they really care about the particular event or opportunity to learn or get inspired. And if they are notoriously declined such opportunities, they will be very frustrated. So the role of the D&I manager is to really provide feedback and coaching to these managers to make them aware that if they continue really focusing on business only, this is a very short-term strategy, because at the end, people will be leaving and will be looking for organizations that will enable them to do a little bit something, outside of their core business operational duties on a daily basis, because people want to develop. And if the company does not provide any opportunity to do that, the frustration will grow and people will leave such managers. We know that people are not leaving organizations, but managers. So again, I would like to highlight the importance of education to managers. Absolutely, business goes first in private sector and private organizations, but it cannot be driven, only by that view, because inclusion prevents, for example, high attrition. So if people are given opportunities to be engaged a little bit more than just doing their daily duties, they will stay longer. The knowledge will, be retained in the organization. They experience relations and many, many other benefits. And this needs to be taught to the managers, especially those that are responsible for, operational work of the teams.
I would normally say ladies and gentlemen or something like that, but ladies. We only have 15 minutes left, and I see ever more interesting questions now. So I will ask the studio now to keep all of us on the screen so that our audience can see everyone responding both verbally and non-verbally. So can we put the image back to all four of us, please? And if we can try and address those questions, this promise they are really, really interesting. So let's go to Shimon to raise your adrenaline a little bit more. And I think Susanna will be keen to answer that one. How do you respond to somebody who tells you honestly, I like working here, I like my job, but I don't want to take part in all this D&I agenda. And I'm overwhelmed with all these D&I events that you organize, and I just ignore them. Anyone? First come, first served.
You promised me that I will take the challenge.
Please.
Yeah. I would, first of all, be very grateful to this person to address the issue openly. And I would emphasize that such an open and honest discussion is the first step forward in overcoming this overdose. The second thing, I would really try to understand why, meaning in what situation this happens. Why do you don't want? Because you don't feel your personal incentive. I mean that how this relates to your personality, or do you feel that it takes too much time, or you don't see the progress? What exactly is the reason, right? And then the third step, I would try to connect the personality and the personal incentive of this exact person to what is happening, because might be again the issue of the awareness and understanding this relation. What if I am a white heterosexual man in middle age? And why should I participate in gender equality topics, for example? This is something I heard personally, right? And then when you dig deeper and see, for example, how gender equality is related to equal pay, to equal parenting, then the person feels the connection, because I'm a parent, right? And I want everyone to be paid equally. So you have to really be psychologists, sometimes psychotherapists in a sense, but this is possible to do.
Anyone else?
So again, we are going back to the finding personal link and personal perspective of every person. I would also think and ask that person why, the same as Susanna, why someone opposes. Is he or she openly is against companies' values? Because we need to remember that companies communicate the values from the very beginning, and the contract between employee and the company is a kind of social contract. Okay, I start working here, so I am aware what are values. I don't need to maybe share it, but I need to find myself in that environment. So I would do it this way for sure, and ask what are the real reasons. So maybe there is the conflict between values. They are not shared by people, or maybe there are different reasons that hold people back to engage in diversity and inclusion.
The next question comes from Pablo. And Pablo doesn't say that it's forbidden to use the word right, good, or proper, but the question he's asking is, what is the skill set that you'd like to see in a D&I manager in order to see them succeed in their role? Can you prioritize it? Because Susanna has already mentioned, sometimes you need to be a psychotherapist even. So what is the actual skill set?
I would say interpersonal skills that would cover, on the one hand, understanding and empathy for others, and being able to accommodate it and translate into strategy. So this is what we were saying, that D&I manager is bridging different points of view and different interests. So really smart D&I manager that will be really privileged or empowered more is not only that he's positioned by senior manager and top managers in the organization, but he will be really smart in emotional tackling sometimes, topics or challenges coming. He will know how to react. He will know what to say and how to emphasize sometimes the right
Monica,
message.
I presume the reason why you keep saying he is just to bring more balance into our discussion in representation, right? Not she.
A little bit, yes. Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
I very often, and actually, my personal experience is that most of D&I managers are women. Similarly to what is the representation within the global HR
Why?
teams, very often
Why?
we have more
Tell
women
me.
involved. This is about the gender again discussion, right? And still the split between more female and masculine professions is there in the world, right? So we have not finalized these discussions. I would say that I haven't seen anyone involved in D&I managers work that is not passionate about the topic. This is the most important thing. If this is a woman or a man, is a secondary, or even it doesn't matter in my opinion. The most important thing is that this is a true passion of the
Interesting.
person, and this is really the way the person also walks the talks, because they are the living examples of what inclusion is. If they are also representing some kind of diversity, minority groups, or those that are normally underrepresented. In my case, this would be disability, because I'm one of those that probably on webinar you don't see it, but when you meet me in person, you might notice that I have some limitations. On the other hand, I don't see many people with disabilities, high in the hierarchy of the organizations. Even if they are there, they are very not necessarily open about their own professional, life story sharing about their disabilities. So it's part of identity. Again, it's a part of identity to be black, or to be white, to be middle-aged, or to be very young, or to be 65 plus. It doesn't matter. What matters is really the passion, the innovative approach, how you introduce and execute on D&I strategy, and how you interact with people. No matter who the people are, no matter what group they represent, you need to somehow bridge the interests, and you need to make people to have conversation, to understand one another better.
The irony of you talking about it this way, all of you, is that it looks to me as if it were one of the most sophisticated and complex functions in the organization, because bridging is never easy, especially when you're dealing with so much psychology into it. I love it, Monica, when you talk about your personal experience and personal perspective. Always so elegant. Thank you for that. At the same time, you said it doesn't really matter if it's a man or a woman in a D&I manager role, doesn't it? Because it does contradict a little the entire balancing effort, doesn't it? Does it matter or doesn't it matter? And essentially, why do we have more D&I
what Monica
managers, women managers?
What Monica said, Monica mentioned the features that are stereotypically connected to women. So it may seem that maybe it's more female role, but
like a secretary job,
add,
like an.
No. It was about relations, not about secretary.
Fine.
About building relations and being empathic and active listener, and having the feeling of the organization. And usually we do it in informal way, and we use our skills to do it. But I would add to that set of skills, I would add more skills to the list from the business perspective. Because in my perspective, I agree totally with Monica. But what I
Good.
see, and I sometimes observe sorry to say, but D&I managers who are powerless, who don't have a power to reach their aims they set to themselves. And for me, these are I will be trying to be fast. Strong leadership skills, and of course it's a kind of meta level because there are many inside. Business orientation and very well understanding of business goals and business specifics of the organizations, just to let those people be, as I said before, that partner in a discussion, just to let those people speak the same language as decision makers do. So for me, it also should be a person who is the kind of translator, mediator, that bridge builder, as we mentioned. And this is in that perspective, what I am talking about. This is the translating of that feelings of the organizations to the language of business goals, and trying to match it and find some way to be successful. And also, there should be also a person who would be willing or open for compromise, because in many situations, this is the person in that role, and that's, I think, embedded in that bridging, is having a balance between being idealistic and being reasonable.
Are you sure just balance, not the right balance? It's a joke.
Balance. Sometimes we really see the world idealistically, and we want to have a huge social change, and we think that it's easy or it's possible. But you need to operate on the grounds that are really possible for you. You need to find your fields of operation, your fields of impact, and use it as much as possible. So that this is that realism I'm talking about.
Thank you very much, Anna. I believe
best person in the role, because if I can mention, best person in the role. So really the best competences, best attitude, best skills that you can find on the market, and you can really align the person to your organizational values. So this is exactly
Anna,
the right way to go.
Or maybe not, Monica, can you, because I'm sure we'll all agree that the thing about stereotypes, often, even those psychological ones, like women have more empathy, they're more understanding, more sensitive. Is it the case that we choose those stereotypes we like more sometimes? Because we all know insensitive women and oversensitive men, don't we?
Of course we do.
It's the way of understanding the world around us. So nothing strange in stereotyping. So we use it as a kind of normal, perceiving our world, a way of perceiving our world. This is how we are constructed.
I would say that 2 more questions. Yes, Monica.
I would say that, diversity is not simply an act of the mind. So it's about what you feel in your heart. You must be emotionally ready for the subjects, because the subjects are sometimes very challenging, very difficult, putting you definitely out of the comfort zone, yourself and many others around you. But having this right balance, as we say, our favorite expression of compassion, empathy toward others, will make you successful as D&I manager. And D&I manager is not only the professional person really educated in that field, but can be anyone driving a change in the organization. And we really need to remember that the greatest expected D&I managers are the operational managers, those that have people underneath, and those that are struggling with these daily challenges and daily conflicts. So if they feel the topic, they will, just embrace it. Go on with your question, Łukasz. I know that you can't wait.
with every minute of this conversation, much as we are enjoying it, I'm sure, I feel that we should be happy it's coming to an end, because with every minute of it, we are putting ever more load on the shoulders of D&I managers, responsibilities, competencies, etc., etc. But what you're really saying indirectly between the lines is that D&I managers should be, above all, credible in their passion for the subject. They need to be convincing, because we all agree that people at the top of the hierarchy in any organization, if there's one thing they often have, is this psychological detector. Does this person believe what she or he they are saying in any given context? So you really need to be convincing, and to be convincing, you need to have really, really strong, tangible, non-abstract arguments why it matters. Otherwise, you come back or you hit the wall with the endless Milton Friedman argument, the business of business is business, right? And one should think we are already behind that era a long time ago, especially in the post-pandemic world. So I suppose this is what you're really saying between the lines. To go to the two questions, one from Celine. How do you coordinate your role with employees' resource groups? They can sometimes overlap and contribute to the overkill when they actually mean good. Anyone?
I had such experiences actually in all organizations I was working for. So again, this is the role exactly of one coordinator. So even if this is not a D&I manager, because not necessarily I support directly the employee networks at State Street, but we do have so-called country coordinators. And these people, in our case, apart from their daily business roles, manage and support the employee resource groups in order to not overlap. And if there is such a willingness to organize an event that might be out of other field, we just encourage the other networks to join. And they make wonderful, fantastic initiatives together, like joining two or more subjects. For example, one of the topics I can just mention are the currently so unpopular, topic in Poland, rainbow families, where we talk about LGBT plus people having also parental roles in the society, because this is a fact. These people do exist, and these people do work with us. So this is so important that joining these efforts, not overlapping, is additional value, additional dimension to create and support such conversations, not to somehow compete for the independence or owning the topic. There's nothing like owning diversity topic, because diversity is multidimensional and cross-sectional. So all of us have got different aspects of diversity in us. So we can't, and even the employee networks cannot just own one of these dimensions.
Thank you very much, Monica. I thought I had two questions, but Katarzyna has just sent me a question which would be a perfect in conclusion question for all of you. But before that, we've got a question from Sneha. I hope I'm not mispronouncing the name. As an industry, we are far away from a D&I overkill. What are your thoughts on where the industry stands or stand? It's an enigmatic sounding question, because you need to decipher what industry we are talking about. But can we try and address this question again? As an industry, we are far away from a D&I overkill. What are your thoughts on where the industry stands? Maybe manufacturing in a broader sense. That would be my guess. Maybe I'm wrong.
I would like to approach that, because I don't know what the industry is, right? So I would reply in general terms, meaning that if you're feeling that you are far away from the overdose, you're extremely lucky, and this is the best time to make it right, in a way, to make the strategy, to analyze your workforce, to represent and reflect the society. And what is the most important, I want really to emphasize that your programs have to be divided in the size of it. So if you are now in the very beginning, you need to plan those small, medium, and large initiatives. And this is the time you can do that, because these small initiatives will give the feeling of action, which prevent the overdose. The medium one will drive the progress, and the large will impact the whole organization. So now this is the time when you're far away from overdose. And the last thing for today, maybe also the conclusion from my side, is that, again, I would like to emphasize the narrative. This is crucial. We build the programs around the positive narrative. We should not emphasize that this is your responsibility, that you have to feel guilt, that there are underrepresented or marginalized groups, and so on, so on, so on. Overdose comes from this negative feeling that I'm guilty of something. Instead, we want to reformulate it, that you will drive change, and this is the positive reinforcement that will prevent the industry and all of us from the overdose. Yes.
So essentially, if you're detecting any kind of negativism and disbelief in yourself, don't expect others to trust and consider you credible. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Sounds good.
Susanna was quiet for so long that I was absolutely sure in the end she would say something deep, powerful, cinematic even. Ladies and gentlemen, the question and conclusion from Katarzyna. So I would like to ask you, the best experts on the market, how to get involved and enter D&I business world. Simply, which path to take to become a D&I manager? A practical question to close our discussion. Who goes first?
I would start with becoming a practitioner. So getting involved maybe with employee network, if they do exist in the organization, getting yourself and organizing opportunities to get engaged in the discussions, but of course, education, reading, acquiring the knowledge, self-studying, and really interacting with others. So networking, mentoring, coaching. There are many ways of developing yourself in a current environment. There are different programs, there are different initiatives. There is volunteering as well in the initiative supporting inclusion, diversity, and equity, initiatives targeting not only internal staff, but also social beneficiaries in the society. I mean, the external ones out of the organizations. There are many opportunities to start with. You need to decide what you want. You need to decide that you want to educate yourself, because I think that this is a great example of a role that you never stop in education. You never stop at getting more understanding, because this is a continuous learning curve, and I'm sure Anna will be able to absolutely agree with me, because as Diversity Hub, I've seen your progress since almost day one, because we've known each other for ages, and how this organization, supporting other big corporate and firms, is developing, how the people and experts are developing, is fantastic. So it's not just a role that you will apply for, it's a journey you are just starting. And absolutely just go for it. If you feel this is your passion, if you have heart for it, just go for it. Find the right supporters, allies that will accompany you in this journey.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah.
Anna?
I would also advise to find your own way of development, because so far there is a lack of particular, dedicated studies or dedicated long courses preparing to the role. I mean, Polish market. So, in my opinion, it is more the perspective of your personal development in your working environment and the dimensions of your development you choose.
Susanna?
And thank you, Monica, for appreciation.
My pleasure, Anna.
I would add to what Anna said, but would make it more precise what to develop, right? What helps me in my role, first of all, is the business background. If you don't have any business background, you have to gain it. The best would be sales, because you'll be selling a lot in diversity and inclusion. It's a crucial aspect. The second one is psychology. I graduated from clinical psychology, and that was the best education I could have in this position. This is like what I can say now, because you have to understand the system theory, you have to understand the dynamics in the workplace, you have to really understand the human nature. And the third aspect, which is extremely important, is this communication one, right? So that you feel the vibe, you know how to build your message, and you have to, combine the business and psychological perspective in it. And the extra point, if you have the opportunity to work for NGO in the field, use it. I think this is extremely important experience to have.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Susanna Romancowa, IKEA Poland, Monica representing State Street, and Anna representing Diversity Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how we have reached the conclusion of our today's debate, and do join us at the beginning of December 1st, 2nd and 3rd for D&I Changemakers 2021. And last but not least, thank you for all of your wonderful questions coming from all over the world. See you in December. Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.